U.S. by Chris Bachelder, book review. It seems like a lot of people these days get their book recommendations off of talk radio, and I'm going to add myself to that list. I first heard of this book while listening to NPR, which I was still in Japan at the time, but I was using an internet cafe. And I'll link down below the link to the NPR program where they talk about this book. I was listening to the interview with the author and I thought, that sounds like a really cool idea for a book. And then when I got back to the USA and got into a US bookstore, this was one of the first books I purchased. So the idea of the book is, it's about Upton Sinclair. Now, if you're like me, you remember Upton Sinclair from high school. He was the author of The Jungle, which was assigned reading in one of my high school classes. Upton Sinclair is brought back to life by modern-day leftists who want to reinvigorate the leftist cause by bringing back one of the great leftist authors. He's then assassinated by somebody on the right, and then he's brought back to life again by people on the left, and then he's assassinated again by somebody on the right, and brought back to life, and assassinated, brought back to life, and assassinated, and so on. The book is a satire on modern politics, and it tries to satirize both the left and the right. Now, as ideas go, this is bizarre, but I thought it sounded just silly enough to be kind of cool. Unfortunately, the execution suffers somewhat. The author seems to have forgotten the cardinal rule of satire. Sometimes a subtle knife is more effective than a sledgehammer. The humor in this book is anything but subtle. The jokes are too obvious, and the biggest problem of all, it's just not funny. I feel like half of the jokes or more either just fell flat or were real groaners. It's difficult to sum up a book like this because there's not really much of a plot. Instead, there are a series of sketches. Each chapter is like its own sketch, as if the author is auditioning for Monty Python. So clearly the author must have asked himself, what are all the different comic possibilities you could get from Sinclair being raised from the dead? And then he just went with all of them, like every idea he got into his head. So again, each chapter is like its own thing. There's one chapter is a literary review of Sinclair's latest book, in which the reviewer claims, apparently being dead has done little for the artistry of Upton Sinclair. Then there's a description of a video game about resurrecting dead leftists from the grave. Then there's a chapter which features a panel discussion featuring the various Sinclair assassins. So in the world of this book, Sinclair has been assassinated so many times that you can have a panel discussion with all the people who have assassinated him. There's a Sinclair hotline in which people call up and report sightings of Sinclair, etc. Just a lot of chapters with a lot of bizarre premises. Now, the last third of the book is a more traditional narrative, containing a story which brings together most of the themes of the book. I don't want to give away any of the plot, but I will say I like this part of the book the best. Now, as for the themes of the book, I don't know. People say that you can't really summarize good satire into a few sentences. Then again, maybe the satire of this book isn't too deep, so I can probably get away with it. Basically, the themes of this book, as I understand them, are twofold. One is that the left has run out of new ideas, And so they're left hanging on to outdated socialist doctrines from the last century, which is why they need to keep resurrecting Upton Sinclair. The right has no ideas at all and has simply made a career of opposing the left. Hence the various Sinclair assassins. And within the fictional world of this book, everyone who assassinates an incarnation of Upton Sinclair gets kind of a cult-like celebrity status on the right. Now, whether either of these is true is questionable. I think certainly there's an element of truth in both of them. I mean, large parts of the left do still talk like they're still in the 19th century. And Philip Gold, a conservative, in his book Take Back the Right, kind of straight out admits that many conservatives just oppose whatever the left is for just as a matter of principle, which is how conservatism has ended up on the wrong side of kind of no-brainer issues like environmentalism, feminism, equal rights, and a whole bunch of other issues that if you just take them objectively, should be no-brainers. But as with any generalization, I think this generalization is fragile. And you could easily go the other way depending on which examples you pick. So if you pick different examples, you could argue that the right is an anachronism, or that the left has made a career of simply being oppositional. At any rate, I think that Chris Bachelder has taken one or two satiric observations about modern politics and stretched it way too thin over a 300-page book. He keeps hitting the same jokes over and over again. Now, this is not only true with his political satire, but also with his literary jokes. There's a running joke that Sinclair uses too much exclamation points, which is just emphasized way too much throughout this book. And besides which, this is something that only English professors care about. I think Chris Bachelder teaches English at a university somewhere. The other joke is that Upton Sinclair always writes the same story over and over again, which I don't know, maybe he does, but the author hits this joke way too many times. All that being said, this wasn't the worst book I've read either. It was moderately entertaining. Parts of it were sort of funny. And, say what you want about all those bizarre sketch comedy sections. At least it was varied enough to keep you from getting bored. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I give this a solid 5, maybe a 6.